Alright, by request, I am doing a video on my personal philosophy. So, we will see how that turns out. I'm dedicating this video to the person who requested it, Antechamber. Anyone who's unfamiliar with him should check out his awesome 3D CG stuff. He's a 3D animator and he's just absolutely amazing. So I dedicate the video to him. I also dedicate the video to Candide, who he convinced me to read this back in the day, despite my trepidations and just me fighting him the entire time. He's like, read Voltaire, read Candide, and I finally did. I've probably read it 6 times now. It's such a wonderful book. One of my new favorite quotes, that I use constantly is, "But now let us tend to our gardens," or "But now let us cultivate our gardens," depending on the translation. Alright, so I have to address my own philosophy. This is going to be tough, because it's big. If you can see, these are the books I've decided to cover. I got a 15-minute limit, so I'm going to rant for a while, cut all the unnecessary stuff, and hope it makes sense. We'll see what happens. Alright, so I think the way I want to go about this is I want to begin with the Aristotelian and Kantian views on things. Then we can see, where I even start. Because, sum up your philosophy in 10 words or less. Good luck with that. That's why I got a stack of books 10 feet tall. So, Aristotle and Plato both had some really cool ideas. I don't mind them. I disagree with a lot. Like, Aristotle is, I think the best way to put this dude that I've heard. It was just a really wonderful off-the-cuff thing. One of my professors just called him the great categorizer. And that's what Aristotle does. He says, okay, here's a bunch of shit. I'm going to put it into groups. And then I'm going to put those groups into groups. And then those groups into subgroups and on and on and on. And I don't know if he was trying to reach God or something. Like, there was a pinnacle he was definitely reaching for. There was a zenith that's inherent in Aristotelian philosophy, which is obviously not there, because he grouped and I'm sure people arrived at God through Aristotelian thought, but it's not inherent within it. Plato and Aristotle, they did what good scientists do nowadays. They postulated a hypothesis. They took the data that they could gain at the time and tried to make it fit together. And so, you know what? Plato was not that far off when he thought fire was made of triangles. Just saying. Oh, he was that far off. He wasn't that far off when he borrowed Democritus's idea and said fire's made out of little indestructible triangles, or four-sided pyramids, to be precise. And Aristotle did some of the same sort of thing. I don't think Aristotle, at least from what I've read, latched on to like the Platonic solids, and I don't think he latched on to that whole Platonic solid elemental idea that comes out of that. There's 5 elements that make up everything, and that's how the world works. I think he was a little more open-minded, and he approached it top-down rather than bottom-up, where he said, okay, we have an apple, and we're going to do stuff with it. So he was more in line with the, rather than the Platonic solids, he was more into the Platonic forms, that an apple has characteristics. It's red, so part of the form of the apple is redness and tastiness, and whatever else you want to apply to it, which is very silly, but it was very profound at the time. Penultimate or penultimate pessimistic Penrosian. I knew there was a triple P going on there. So moving on to Kant, and well, in this case, the Critique of Pure Reason. I've also read the Critique of Practical Reason. I think I've read any other books by Kant. I've read a couple of his papers, but this motherfucker's dense. Don't bother. You will learn so little from him. He's basically a trial by fire for people who want to get into philosophy. If you can read and understand Kant, okay, we're your new friends, says the philosophy teacher, because it's so dense, it's so complicated, and you come out of it, and the ideas you come out of it with are so simple that it's just, this 700 pages is worthless. It's fucking worthless. You'll beat your head against the wall going, trying to understand the categorical imperative, trying to understand the manifold reality, trying to understand all these concepts he brings in, and then trying to work in his wonderful backdoor God and see how it all works together. And like it's an interesting thing to do, but it's just 100% mental masturbation. You will learn, you'll come away from Kant going, oh, I'm good at thinking, but I learned not one single thing about how the world actually works. So, awful philosopher, unless you just really want to crack out on philosophy and understand how thought processes and logical processes work. A fucking textbook on logic. This is what everyone in the fucking world needs to understand. It's just a textbook on logic. I mean, I don't remember, or care if you can remember after you're done with logic why there is an existential fallacy, like what the difference between Aristotelian and Boolean logic is. If you forget that, okay, that's fine. But I mean, there's so much shit in, this is a pretty thin book for a textbook, that people do all the fucking time, ad hominem arguments, slippery slope arguments from ignorance, arguments from authority. I mean, it's just all these awful things that people do constantly. I mean, how many times have you heard a politician say, well, Obamacare is an awful idea because Obama's from Kenya. I mean, even, taking that proposition, Obama's from Kenya, is true, it has nothing to say about the actual idea of socialized medicine or whatever it is. And I don't care if you disagree or agree. I'm not even bringing up whether I agree or disagree. And it's the same way with Mitt Romney, like the Keystone Pipeline, for example. The liberals say that it's going to destroy the world. The Republicans say it's going to create 10 trillion jobs. That's fine. That's all well and dandy. Argue the point. But when they say Mitt Romney is a good person because he okayed the Keystone Pipeline, or would if he was elected president, those two are non sequitur to each other. One does not logically follow the other. That's fucking garbage. And you can run around like a dummy. Run around like a dummy. Pragmatism is the best work out there by far. I actually own 2 copies, and it's so good that I don't have either of those copies because I have given them to people. Like, every time I buy a couple copies, I give them away, and sometimes some of them come back to me, most of the time they do not. And so I think I've read that book 5 or 6 times. I've probably given away 10 fucking copies of it, which is fine. If someone gets something out of it, that's all I give a shit about. But so pragmatism deals simply with how to live life pragmatically, obviously. Like what degrees of knowledge are, and so it's a pretty simple situation where he uses a wonderful example he's talking about a clock on a wall, and you don't need to look at the clock on the wall and think that the person that made that clock is trying to trick you, or think that time is an illusion in a pragmatic sense. Time may be an illusion. I have no idea. But for all intents and purposes, for the way we go about living our lives, time is a tool we use, and it works well. And it just expand every idea you've ever had on that. If it's a thing you know about and you understand and it works well, even through a second, third, or fourth party, it's not a bad thing to make an assumption. The assumption becomes a bad idea, and James is, and this is why I love him so much. He's famous for being obsessed with like psychics and people who claim to levitate stuff with their minds, and he actually believed this garbage, unfortunately. But it shows that he was, even though he had that pragmatic approach, he was open-minded enough to be able to sit back and go, maybe people can levitate pianos with their knees, or pianos with their minds. And then the famous James quote, which is hilarious, he went to see a woman who claimed to levitate a piano, and it's not going to be verbatim, but it's something to the extent of, like, she was the most amazing woman I've ever seen. I don't think I could lift an entire piano with my knee. Camus is awesome. And the analogy that he uses with Sisyphus is wonderful. And Hitchens quoted, it was actually a rabbi, so this is a rabbinical quote, not from Myth of Sisyphus, but it kind of feels the same way, where someone asked him to define truth, and Hitchens replies, I can't define it. What I can do is explain how I feel about it. And he says, so really, do you have to climb right there? Thank you. It's something that we have to seek, but we'll never be sure that we'll actually find it. I mean, that, to me, that is the definition of truth. Because this is just for Antichamber. Good book. I accidentally ended up with 2 copies of it. If you want one, hit me up. They want you to behave. So, pragmatic nihilist. I guess that's the term I settle on, at least for tonight. I want to go over so much more stuff, but I'm already at... This will get edited down, so this has to be 15 minutes. I'm at an hour right now of me ranting and ranting and ranting, and I could go way longer, so... This thing will be truncated and awful. Some of my points won't make sense because there will be stuff missing. I don't care. Robot, if you can't figure this shit out, it's your own fault. You've talked to me enough times, you know where my stance is. So, I'm going to end this video by throwing a Bible at my video.